One of my favorite viral stories from a few years ago has been making its way around the internet again. And so in case any of you have been too busy with holiday revelry and not scrolling the clickbait on your devices, I just wanted to share it here. It's about a performance by world-renowned violinist Joshua Bell. Anybody know Joshua Bell? Heidi?
Yes.
Yes.
He's a fellow Hoosier graduate.
A fellow Hoosier graduate.
Yeah.
So,
17 times.
that's a lot of times. If you don't know him, he is sort of a true virtuoso, known as one of today's most accomplished violinists. He's known for selling out venues across the world, from Boston to Vienna. But in 2007, he did a really special gig in partnership with the Washington Post. Now, this was not in an ornate concert hall, but in the Washington, D.C. subway system.
Yes.
So as part of a little social experiment designed to test if people could recognize beauty and skill where it was not expected. On the morning of January 12, 2007, Bell, dressed in his street clothes and a baseball cap, set up his case, just like any other busker might, at the entrance to the L'Enfant Plaza metro station. He took out his $3.5 million 1913 Stradivarius violin, and he began to play. Over the next 40 minutes or so, while being recorded by a secret camera, he played 6 classical pieces, some by Massenet, Schubert, Ponce, and Bach, including Bach's 14-minute Chaconne Violin Partita No. 2 in D minor, generally considered to be the single greatest solo violin composition ever created. Anybody want to guess what happened? Here's an excerpt from Gene Weingarten's Post article entitled Pearls Before Breakfast. 3 minutes went by before something happened. 63 people had already passed when finally there was a breakthrough. A middle-aged man altered his gait for a split second, turning his head to notice that there seemed to be some guy playing music. Yes, the man kept walking, but it was something. A half minute later, Bell got his first donation. A woman threw in a buck and scooted off. It was not until 6 minutes into the performance that someone actually stood against a wall and listened. And things never got much better from there. In the 3/4 of an hour that Joshua Bell played, 7 people stopped what they were doing to hang around and take in the performance for at least 1 minute. 27 of them gave money, most of on the run, for a total of $32 and change, which means that 1,070 people hurried by, totally oblivious, few even turning to look, even though they were just a few feet away. Which is pretty amazing, right? The night before, he had sold out Carnegie Hall with tickets for $100 apiece, and nobody could even be bothered to acknowledge him in the subway station. Now, so much meaning has been made of after the fact about this little experiment and what it all means, and it has launched a myriad of discussions about music and art appreciation and culture and privilege and westernization and all these different kinds of things. It has also served as vindications for all musicians everywhere who have given it their all and felt as though they were being ignored, whether in a bar or a concert hall or on the side of the street. The experiment has also offered an interesting window into thinking about time and the pressures that time in modern life, which can function to close us off to other avenues of perception, which is another sermon I like to give sometimes about how being late actually short circuits our values like compassion. You can watch this happening all over the place. And that's all so interesting, but I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about the one guy out of about 1,163 people, the one guy that day that actually stopped and listened. And he was there for about 10 minutes, clearly awed by the quality of the music. That one guy, that's Simeon and Anna. That's who that is, right? Do you know about Simeon and Anna? Right, this is the part of the Bible that only rolls around about once every 3 years in the cycle when there's this second Sunday between Christmas Eve and Epiphany. So we follow Luke's story all the way to the end. Like, it turns out, Luke's not done at the point most of our pageants cut off. They say, and the shepherds returned to their fields, and they were so delighted. The end, everyone take a bow. That's not actually the end of how Luke wants to tell us the nativity story. He continues with Jesus' naming and circumcision on the 8th day, and this trip to the temple for Mary's purification on the 40th day, when the Holy Family is greeted by these odd and wondrous characters there in the temple. Side note, maybe next year we include Simeon and Anna in our Advent pageant, a tribute to Luke. Just a thought. Though now that I think about it, maybe they might be a little challenging to portray as they're characters that really walk right out of the past. Right? They're representing the ancient priests and prophets and prophetesses of the old days of Israel. And for anyone reading this story in the context of the first century would know the ritual undertakings would have served to prove that Mary and Joseph were observant Jews, followers of the law. But their reception by Simeon and Anna would have demonstrated that the Jewish establishment had received and affirmed them too, despite the strange circumstances around Mary's pregnancy. It's like somebody reading this story couldn't say, well, yeah, you say he's Messiah, but only some weirdos camping out with their sheep in the field seem to agree with you. Right? They need a little bit of more credit. So right here comes Jesus into the temple to consult and be welcomed by the priest and the prophetess. These were respected temple elders who saw and affirmed Jesus' identity. So that's the historical and biblical context. But I have to say, just narratively, I love this scene. Right? You can imagine weary Mary and Joseph. I guess you can imagine if you've ever been close to a 1-month-old infant. Weary Mary and Joseph, right? They're making their way to Jerusalem, now about 1 month distant from their unexpected journey to Bethlehem and the drama of Jesus' birth and the unexpected visitation from the shepherd, and they haven't slept the whole time in between. And you can imagine maybe they started to think, like, was any of that real? Did any of that really happen? Now they've just got this baby here, right? They decide to go to the temple to make their offering for Mary's post-birth restoration to ritual cleanliness, and they offer 2 doves rather than a lamb, sort of evidence that Jesus' family was solidly working class. And they walk into the temple, and these 2 strange, kind of ethereal folks greet them with words that sound like something out of a Harry Potter movie. This child is destined for the falling and rising of many. You know, which is kind of cool, but also kind of weird. What does that mean? You know, clearly Simeon and Anna saw in Jesus something that they had been waiting for a long time. Which, whenever I read the story, leads me to the following question: how did they know? How did they know? How did they know that it was him? Anna had been sitting there for 70 years. How did she know? With thousands of people coming in and out of the temple every day to do exactly what Mary and Joseph were doing, among other things. How did they know? Now, they knew they were looking for the Messiah, for one that would begin the redemption of Israel and the whole world, right? But how did they know what they were looking for? Surely they didn't expect a baby of 2 bedraggled new parents, working people, come to do what was required of them. I've actually thought a lot about this, and the only answer I can come up with is they knew because they were paying attention. They were paying attention. They had made time to pay attention to the subtle signs of hope and to the nearly imperceptible traces of the Spirit's activity that can only be perceived when one is quiet and relentlessly attentive to them. I have to believe they knew because they were attuned to hope. And they had practiced for many years watching out for the hopeful thing that they anticipated would appear. They were the guy in the subway station, somehow able to hear the beauty rising above the din and to make a choice to stop and perceive it. And I really wonder about that as a model for us moving into this new year, into 2023. You know, it occurs to me that for the last several years, and certainly those years during the pandemic, we all became conditioned, necessarily for our own safety, to become hyper-attuned to some really scary stuff, like life or death stuff. In fact, several times just this week as I was feeling a little impatient with the kids who have been home from school 11 days already and getting pretty stir crazy, I just had these flashbacks to that time in 2020 when we were with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months on end in our house. And no one could come over to visit because it wasn't safe, and we couldn't take them anywhere because we didn't know if it was safe, and the playgrounds were closed because it was the best idea someone had for how to keep kids safe, and we were like wiping down our oranges from the store because we didn't know. We were watching the case numbers every day, grimacing as they rose, and everything, everyone, every place other than home was a threat. Do you remember that time? That wasn't so long ago. And I should say, I know that we don't live in that space anymore. Although I recognize that some of our folks with health risk factors still do, and I think we need to feel that and not leave them behind. But I would say our family doesn't live in that space anymore. And societally, we're in a different time too. We have vaccines and antivirals and so much more knowledge. But sometimes I do wonder if my brain, or maybe if I could say if our brains, have caught up to that change yet. Like, I'm wondering if my brain has really let go of the habit of constantly fixating on the risks and on the fear and on the instability. And while I want us all to continue to be really safe, and especially to take care of the most vulnerable among us best we can, I also think it might be spiritually worthwhile for us to give our brains a little help kind of retooling for this different time and space that we've entered. I wonder if our brains and maybe our hearts and maybe our souls might need a little bit of help adjusting and learning to be attuned to hope and to peace and to beauty. I'm not saying those two things are mutually exclusive. You can live at risk and still appreciate beauty. And you can appreciate beauty and still be aware of the great brokenness in the world. But in my own experience, I sense fear sometimes tends to be a little stronger, kind of take us over, and we become the 1,000 people rushing by the once-in-a-lifetime beautiful music because we have so much else consuming our minds and hearts. I just wonder if it wouldn't be a worthy priority for this year to find some time to be little Simeons and little Annas, just really paying attention. Really paying attention to the faces that pass us by, to the children in our midst, to the music floating around us, to really pay attention and have faith that hopeful things are there to be seen, to really pay attention and to look carefully until they can be. I'm not being a Pollyanna here. I know this takes work, and I know there's a whole lot to pay attention to in our world right now, and some of it's really difficult. I know at the end of the day it takes effort to add on search for signs of redemption and hope to our to-do list. I know we have all our own burdens to bear, but I also think that God is inviting us, especially through this Christmas story, to tend to that important work of looking for hope in the places where it's not expected, of learning to assess which things are fixed and which things can grow and change. And to do that, knowing that we'll find God's presence in those places. Here's my confession. It's that I don't really make New Year's resolutions anymore. I used to want to lose weight or run a triathlon or write a book, learn how to arrange flowers and do Tai Chi. And maybe it's just the burdens of caretaking. The last few years, I've only made one single measurable resolution, which was to floss more. But I didn't do that either. Then it occurs to me that maybe those things did not represent the deepest desires of my souls, which is why they didn't pan out. But I've also learned that resolutions rarely take into the account the unpredictability of our lives. We stand here on the threshold of a new year and we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know. We can try and make some plans, but the truth is, we can get sick. Or we get a promotion. Or we can take a trip that changes everything, or lose someone we really love, or come to a new understanding of ourselves. We really have no idea what will come. So sometimes it's hard to make plans about what will happen. But I really think that the life of faith is about trusting that among all those things, among everything that will unfold in the year to come, God will be active, and God will be present, and God will be filling this world with God's hopeful melody. And our job is simply to find a way to hear it, and when we see it, to stop and to name it. So that's my hope for us here in this year to come. And I ask those things and offer those hope in the name of the God who created, redeemed, and sustained us always. Amen. Typically, we